Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Karen is a pediatric physical therapist and the owner of Inchstones PT. She received her doctorate in physical therapy in 2014 and became a board-certified pediatric clinical specialist in 2019. She's one of the less than 1% of PTs in the United States that have this board certification. She has experienced working with children of all ages and abilities in home, clinicals, and in a school setting. In addition to Inchstones PT, she also works as a school-based physical therapist. She is passionate about educating and empowering parents and caregivers on facilitating early motor milestones, especially in the first year of life. She believes in celebrating the little moments, or the Inchstones, that happen in between these large milestones. In her free time, she enjoys spending time with her husband and 3 dogs, doing anything outside during all of the New England seasons, and is a huge Boston sports fan. I am so excited to have you here with me today because I think this is going to be debatably one of the most controversially topics that I've had on the podcast thus far, and I am kind of hyped about it. So thank you for coming.
It's pretty controversial. It is. We'll see what people think.
I know. So I know you said you had some stuff up on your Instagram stories, and this will go up a little bit while after we actually record it. But when it goes up, I'm definitely throwing some stuff up on my story too. So if people are listening, go head over to Instagram. We're going to have some polls happening. Definitely tell us what side of it you're on before listening to the episode, and then maybe after too, to see I don't know, maybe we'll change some minds today. Who knows?
Absolutely.
But before we dive into the Snoo and all that goes along with it, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into what you do now and all that jazz?
Sure. So my name's Karen. I'm a pediatric physical therapist. So I went to PT school. Like every other physical therapist, you kind of come out as a generalist. But I always knew I wanted to do pediatrics. And more specifically, I love working with infants and the 0 to 3 population. So I made sure that I had a good clinical experience that was going to get me a lot of peds. So I went to Houston, Texas. I was at Texas Children's Hospital. And then I worked for 5 or 6 years until the pandemic hit at just a community-based hospital in Massachusetts. I was there and I did a lot of their pediatric programming. I did aquatic therapy, concussion therapy. And then I transitioned. Yeah, it was a lot. I had a really good mix there. And then I transitioned to the schools because that's who was going to be open during the pandemic. And I've always in my mind known I wanted to start my own practice. And I didn't really know what that meant. They don't teach you that in business school or, in PT school, they don't teach you anything about business.
No business.
So, I got a business coach. I just kind of started it as a website and social media. And it's grown now. So Inchstones PT, I founded it 2 years ago, the LLC. It's actually today is my 2-year anniversary.
Oh my goodness.
Of filing with the state, which is exciting. I did it on 2/22/22. It was really weird. I didn't plan it. I just thought that was cool. So yeah, I've been doing Inchstones. I still work full time. Inchstones PT is my baby on the side. I do classes locally at Stork Ready in North Reading, and also in Haverhill. I'm starting some classes as well. And then I do virtual consults with people around the world. So not really physical therapy, but more just tummy time troubles or hey, my kiddo's not rolling, or is this a concern? Should I be referred to a PT? And then I do in-home mobile-based physical therapy evaluation and treatments in the Merrimack Valley in Massachusetts, as well as I can also do virtual telehealth too. So, in my spare time, as I say, and the concept really is, I've always said to parents, Inchstones are sort of the mini milestones in between. And I work with a lot of children with disabilities, delays that might not ever get to meet those big motor milestones like walking, sitting, even. So, we really appreciate the little mini Inchstones along the way. And parents
Yeah.
really like that because, it helps to not compare because as a parent, everyone wants to compare, right? And
Right, right.
I think that's like one of the big things with the Snoo that we'll get into is like you see the aesthetic and you see the compare game a lot on social media and
Yes.
those big accounts. And you kind of see it and you're like, well, I want that. So and at that price point, for sure, it's a big investment, I think, for just a few
Absolutely.
months. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so I
Yeah,
think it
I
helps
love
with
the
that.
Inchstone idea though. Like because it's so true. Because I think that everyone looks at stuff and they're like, "Oh, like okay, my baby's supposed to roll at this age or sit up at this age or stand or walk or whatever." And those are like, yeah, they're milestones, but there's so much in between to get them to those points that I don't think people like realize sometimes, especially first-time parents. So being able to focus on those. And I love when you post different things about like, okay, what happens in between here and here and like what should you look for? Because every time you share those, I'm like, yes, people need to know these things.
Yeah, and your baby's not rolling, but they're doing all the other things. So like just have fun with that, and just being on the floor with your child, playing with them is like so amazing for their development. And in today's day and age, especially with just our culture and how fast-paced everything is and busy, and especially if, it's not your first child and you have other kiddos that you got to get to different things, I think
Right.
just being able to celebrate those like mini milestones, and every child's different. So to even compare to your own kids, siblings can be challenging too.
Right. 100%. I love that. Um, we could talk about it for forever. So let's do our pivot now before we start, tangenting totally. Um, so the snoo, like let's we're gonna I want to assume that everyone listening knows what this is, but we're gonna go with maybe they don't. So let's give them like a quick rundown. So the snoo is a bassinet that is on the market. That personally I will say is outrageously priced for a bassinet. I mean, I would assume you agree.
Absolutely.
Um, and it's essentially this bassinet that baby gets strapped into a specific swaddle that connects to the bassinet. And there's different settings on it, but the big idea is that this bassinet moves from side to side, swiveling so that it keeps baby moving. So ideally, it helps them to sleep through the night. And there's so many things that go along with this. And originally, like it wasn't, approved by anything. It was just every parent saying, oh my gosh, my baby went from not sleeping to sleeping through the night with this, right? But there's so much more to it. And I think that sleep deprived parents, as we'll talk about, just kind of grasp onto whatever they can when it comes to sleep. So I think we had talked about doing an episode on the snoo, and then the news came out that it had been what was I don't even remember what the exact title. Do you remember what it was?
So it's FDA approved. They got the de novo
That's
approval.
right.
So basically the FDA kind of looks at products on the market, and they say this, and I think it's true because I haven't seen any other, that there's no other sleep product out there that's FDA approved. So but when the FDA approves something, they're looking at what are you saying it's doing, and is that doing that, and has there
Right.
been any adverse effects?
Right.
So now that they have the approval, which is like a really big deal, it's actually really hard to get FDA approval for a lot of
100%.
things, especially in the baby space. So that was huge news. So, that made their marketing, I feel like, just kind of take off like a different angle too.
Absolutely.
And I
Absolutely.
think,
When that went up, that's what we talked about. Was we were
right.
saying we're like now it becomes okay, now that this is FDA approved, are people going to think that that's what they have to have? Because when you hear that they're approved by certain organizations that you trust, you're going to go, okay, well, I need to have that then. And my best friend had it and said it worked. So I think that it really did kind of change the baby space a lot when that happened.
Yeah. And, I think it just means that it's does what it says it's going to do, which is it keeps your baby, when used correctly, it keeps your baby on their back for the whole time they're in there. Because if you've ever seen it, and if you haven't, like go look it up, because it's really like the most secure swaddle and restrictive swaddle that I've ever seen. And then it also clips onto the bassinet. So like your baby absolutely is not going to be able to get into another position. So we
Yeah.
know from the Back to Sleep campaign that the safest place for babies to sleep is on their back. So it's
Right.
doing that. So they can't say that they've seen a reduction in SIDS or anything like that. That's not what the FDA is saying. The FDA is just saying like, yes, you made this product to keep babies on their back and you've been successful in doing so. So now the FDA is responsible for all of like their reporting and such. So if there are any adverse events or, any injuries or anything like that, any negative effects, babies using this, then they have to report that right away to the FDA. So they kind of take control of that for them.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the big thing to mention is this, sleep item is not being marketed to FDA approval for being something that's going to make your baby sleep or something that's going to help soothe them or XYZ. It's merely saying that it's going to keep your baby on their back. And that's what the FDA is saying. So FDA approval is saying, yes, it's keeping baby on their back because like you said, if you've ever, seen a snoo or especially tried to put the straps of the swaddle into the bassinet on the snoo, especially when there's a baby in them, the elasticity of that elastic that connects to the back of the swaddle and gets clipped into this bassinet is so tight. I kid you not. I've worked with a couple snoos and one of them baby I would always rock in, get her drowsy in the swaddle and then strap her in and stretching it, I was like, it was like a bomb was gonna go off. I'm like, I have to do it so slowly, but also get
Yeah.
it done and not wake her up while doing
Right.
it.
You really have to
It's
stretch
crazy.
it to get there. Yeah.
Absolutely. So keeping them on the back, absolutely it does that, right? And that can be great for safe sleep. However, there, as we know, as professionals and especially as PT, that can cause some bumps in other areas of life if you're, strapping them in so tightly to these bassinets, right?
Absolutely. And, it's really restricting movement. So, one of the big things that a lot of PTs think about is swaddling. So the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends swaddling till about 8 weeks old or your baby's showing signs of rolling, which can be earlier. The SNOO says it's safe to keep your baby in that swaddle in there, which we should also mention too. I don't know if this is really for someone who has one already. Like, I think if you're listening and you already have a SNOO, like, great. If it's working for you, awesome. I think
Right.
this is more for people that are seeing it and seeing their friends have it, their family members, and they're like, "Ooh, do I need this? Do
Do
I
I need
need
it? And that's the question I get all the time. Like friends and family have literally messaged me. I had someone literally message me, didn't even announce she was pregnant yet. She was like, I need to know, like, is this really worth it? Because like they were trying to figure out budgets for baby registries, and I was like, no, you don't need one. But you're right. Everyone sees it and they go, oh, I need this. So yes, if you have one, we're not saying that you're a bad person. We're not saying that you shouldn't be using it. If it's working for you, go for it. We're just going to explain to those who may not have one first, why you may not need one. And then we'll dive more into if you are using one, how can you, balance that
Yeah,
out?
because there is a lot to get into with it. There's so much, like you said, that's involved. But first of all, the thing that I was going to say is just that it restricts movement. So, like as a PT, like I often that's like one of the first things. Say I'm working with a 2 or 3 month old and they have torticollis, which is tightening of the neck. So they're always staying in one position, or they have plagiocephaly, which is just a big scary word for flat head. So you might have a brachycephaly, which is just flat head on the back. You might have plagiocephaly, which is flat head on the side. Either way, like we don't want babies to have misshaped heads for lots of reasons. Some people say it's purely cosmetic, which minimally it is, but we also worry about just like ear shape, the way the jaw forms, and other things when we have severe cases. And I
Right.
have seen parents tell me that they've used the SNOO and their flat head on their baby has gotten worse because they're not really going to be moving around a lot. There's a lot of primitive reflexes that babies have to work through in the first few months. And the only way to kind of work through those and sort of integrate those reflexes is movement. So one of them, when our head turns to one side, our arms go with it. We kind of call it the archer pose. So if your baby is stuck in like this restricted swaddle for 6 months, which is what they recommend, they might not be able to work through those other primitive reflexes too. And if they're not getting a lot of awake, supervised floor time, tummy time, and other things that kind of counterbalance that, then I just don't know if I love them being in that restrictive swaddle for that long. So the big thing is like it's very restrictive,
Yes.
which some babies love. I've had parents that say that's the only way they would sleep for the first few months. Okay. Again, if it works for you, great. But, as a PT, I don't like to see restricted movement after like usually 8 weeks. And I've worked with babies who are starting to show signs of rolling much earlier. So typical swaddling, like not talking about the snoo, just typical swaddling. If your baby's starting to show those signs, you need to just ditch the swaddle. And some people think like taking arms out, one arm or two arms is not considered swaddling, but swaddling is actually more the compression on the chest rather than what the arms are doing. So you have to go to a sleep sack at that point, which would be like a wearable blanket, where their arms are free and there's no compression on the chest. Don't even get me started on the weighted sleep sacks that are out
That's
there.
a whole nother episode that we could
Not
dive
safe.
into.
Definitely not safe. So yeah, swaddling and the snoo are different because with swaddling, you'd be able to turn like the what we worry about is if a baby say swaddled still at 3 months and they can roll to the side, they're not going to be able to free their arms and help them get back to their backs. So on the snoo, it's marketed, you can have them going until they're about 6 months, and or pushing up on hands and knees, which that like a lot of skills happen before we push up on hands and knees. And a lot of these skills happen in the crib first. Like a lot of babies first happen in the crib. If they're in a safe sleep environment, it's just like a flat surface, a regular bassinet. So they're going to learn how to do those sort of rolling, going from belly to back and things like that, when it's safe for them to do so. So I really try to tell my patients, my parents, especially if we have something else going on, like if we have a tight neck and we're just in that snoo the whole night, like of course they're going to stay in that position. So
Right.
that could, make things worse for them.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
think
So
it's so tricky because it is marketed so much to this parent sleep deprivation, right? And everybody that you talk to when you're even starting to be pregnant and people know, they're like, "Oh, sleep now while you can," right? And like that's not helpful. The world has now made it like you're never going to sleep. So when something comes out like the snoo or, like the dreaded weighted sleep sack that says this is going to help your baby sleep. And not only are you hearing that, but you're seeing that and you're hearing friends and family telling you that it worked for them, then you really do get like peer pressured into it so easily when you're sleep deprived because people just want to sleep. But I think that it's really important to know the full scope of what this snoo does. And it's not just getting your baby to sleep at night. It does include this extremely restrictive, positioning of this baby, which can cause, like you said, some issues with muscle movement, milestone meeting, and lots of other things too.
yeah, and just to point out too, there are other, and I haven't looked into them a ton, but there are definitely some other, they call them smart bassinets out there that don't use the swaddle that the snoo does. So, I'm not against the movement of the snoo. I think it's more because that for some babies that could be, really helpful, like really beneficial. And I want to talk about the FDA too, that now can go into hospitals. And so I know a lot of nurses, doctors who work in NICUs, even therapists, who work in special care nurseries and NICUs
Hmm.
that have this in their hospital, and they say it works wonders. So, I think that is a pro of the FDA approval too, is that now hospitals can start to use it. And so that is not already not a natural environment. If your
Yeah.
baby's in the NICU, if your baby's born preterm, they're still supposed to, be in that, be still inside the mom, still getting all of that vestibular input, which means just movement. So I think that it can help those babies. A lot of babies who are born addicted to opioids, they're using the snoo for because they're so dysregulated
Right.
that the movement, the sound, and the responsiveness of the bassinet is helping them get more sleep, which is super important for their little brains to develop and to
Yeah.
kind of wean off of, that opioid dependency. So, I think that is a huge huge space, and we won't go into that much more. So, I think it's a absolute pro of the Snoo to be able to use it in hospitals and settings like that, that maybe the parents can't be there all night long.
Right. We don't have
Maybe
enough arms to hold all these babies, right?
exactly. Maybe there's a shortage of nursing, or even with a full staff, and if they have a full NICU and every baby's crying at once, it's hard to respond. And that's another thing, is that they market it as an extra set of hands. So I think that that can be a little bit, as a new parent who might be scared or anxious about sleep, or, exhausted, right? Like, the true safe sleep is so hard to do, I think, as a new parent, and especially like the shifts, right? So you're supposed to take 4 hour shifts for your partner. And like, well, what if your partner's going back to work? Or what if you're a single parent? Or what if that's just
Right.
not feasible for your partner? What if you have a sick toddler? Like, there's so many things, right? So I think that the responsiveness, yes, you might miss the cues of the baby. And I don't think that a 4, 5, 6 week-year-old, is supposed to sleep 8 hours a night. And that is what the Snoo is doing. And yes, that's great. The parents are going to wake up feeling awesome, right? Like, I got a full night of sleep, but you might be missing those important cues and those hunger cues that this responsive extra set of hands bassinet sort of took over and soothed them back to sleep, which is great for sleep, but maybe not great for like overall development, especially if you have
Absolutely.
a baby who's struggling with feeding and you might miss that cue throughout the night.
Absolutely. It does. It pacifies things that sometimes shouldn't be pacified. Babies are easily coerced sometimes, and that's for the good and the bad, right? Like sometimes you really do. You're like, wow, they've ate, they have a clean diaper, they're just so tired, and you have to coerce them into taking that nap sometimes, which is great. But then there's times like this where it is middle of the night that, this new extra set of hands is pacifying baby back to sleep, which it may not be time for them to do that, right? It may not be developmentally appropriate for them to, or nutritionally for them to. And I think that that's also just like the society that we're in, is that people are like, well, we want babies to sleep, or like, oh, well, if they can fall back to sleep, then that means they're not hungry. And that's not always the case. You want to be getting proper information. And I talk with that all the time with postpartum, but especially with sleep clients when I'm working with sleep training families at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months old, because sometimes babies still need to eat once or even twice in the middle of the night at that age. Um, and so getting proper information and listening to your pediatrician and trusting your gut and all that jazz can be like so important. And I think people forget about that.
Yes, absolutely. And you can't use it without the swaddle. And I think that's a big thing too. And,
Yeah.
there's the whole wean mode, which we can kind of talk about too. So once your baby is showing these signs, or they're getting close to that 6 month mark, or all of a sudden you see them push up onto their hands and knees, then you're like, oh no. So parents often, I've heard it from a lot of parents actually, that have said there's different levels. And
Yeah.
they said, I do not let it go past level 2, because the other levels of the vibration, movement, and everything, they said just looked like it was way too much.
I had someone
The
tell me that they don't let it go all the way up because it looks like an exorcism. Like when we say this movement, if you haven't seen it, it's literally the shifting of like left to right. This like panel moves. So it makes baby move and jiggle side to side, especially their head. And so it literally looks so shaky. Like to the first time I ever saw one, and I saw how fast it moved, I literally asked the parents if they could like turn off some of the settings. They turned it on manual so that I had to turn it on and off by using the button, because it literally made me, as a sleep consultant and a postpartum doula, uncomfortable to see how much shaking this baby was having. And I'm like, of course it's regulated in some manner. They've
yeah,
done testings on this before it's gone to market, so it can't be shaken baby syndrome. But looking at it, the jiggling of this baby's head side to side, especially when their teeny tinies just came home, it hurt my heart. It made me so uncomfortable.
yeah. And I think a lot of parents might feel that way too. But like you said, it's absolutely, according to Happiest Baby, like it is
Right.
safe, at every level. They have done all that testing, and I'm sure that's something the FDA looked at too. But
Absolutely.
would definitely make me like feel a little icky too, I think.
Yeah.
People have said that, which is just, that's a parent perspective, which is just interesting that they bought this product and then they're putting
They're not
restrictions
even using
on
it all
it.
the way.
Yeah, so that, I thought that was interesting. And the sound machine, I'm sure, has like the lower decibels and all of that. But usually you don't want the sound machine that close to baby. Usually you want it across the room, or so it's interesting that it's part of the bassinet too. So when you are ready to wean and you need to get into a crib, they have a weaning mode. And so parents, some have said like they've had great success, that, they did it for a couple
Mhm.
of weeks and their baby was fine. One thing I do like about the swaddles is as the babies get bigger. So I think in the large, there's a couple different sizes of the swaddles, which makes sense. And I think in the large one, you are able to have arms free, and that is part of the weaning mode. So I don't know if your baby hit the weight, if you could like try that earlier, because again, arms free is just
I
going to be
believe all of them do have the unbuttoning of the arms. They
okay.
should, because
Okay.
I've had a couple different people. I actually have one that a client sized out of that I use for teaching purposes to show people the swaddles.
Yeah.
And I think it's a small and it still even has the arms unbuttoned because I know some people, some babies really do just prefer their arms out. So I think that you can, which is great.
Yeah. But the thing is, I've seen people and I've heard of people saying that they just unzip it. And that's the thing with about these like types of products, is you have to use it to the exact manual. So
Yeah,
if you're bringing the arms out, that's great, but you can't unzip it because
no.
that's just going to change the whole fit of everything. And that could be really unsafe for baby too.
Absolutely, especially with this movement that we're having. If they're not properly strapped into this machine and they get free, that moving and grooving can really do some damage. So,
Yeah, certainly for a
absolutely.
baby who's not able to, a younger baby who's not rolling yet on their own, and things like
Exactly.
that.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, let's do like a quarter pivot here, kind of, I guess. If people have this machine, they're using it, right? Like I have worked with clients that have it. And there's a couple things I've done that I'd be interested in like your input on, as well as like if people have it, they're listening, they're using it right now. What kind of things can they do either with the machine and while they're using it, this bassinet, or like when baby's awake time things they can do to help compensate for the restrictive positioning of this snoo. When I've worked with families, I haven't obviously, like we just said, we can't really change much of the restrictive movement during the actual snoo movement and positioning. As a postpartum doula and sleep consultant, when I'm working with families that have them, I'm often saying like, let's do it on manual mode, like I mentioned. So I'm only pressing the button to help, right after we put them down, after I've rocked them, to give them a little movement, and then I'll turn it off after 5 or 10 minutes when I know they're in that deep sleep, and that helps them to learn to get back to sleep, right? But when it comes to the restriction, like you said, there isn't much that we can do. So if we are using a snoo and people are trying to compensate for those milestones to kind of like help baby still meet those and all that jazz, what kind of things can people be doing during awake time periods to help with that?
Yeah, I mean, snoo or not, right? Safe sleep tells us that we need to put babies on their back to sleep. So if you have a snoo, then you know that your baby, and you're using it up until the full 6 months, like that is your baby's going to be in the same position every single night. And so one thing I tell parents, either however they're using, bassinet, crib, whatever they're using, especially a lot of babies, they do recommend, AAP recommends in rooming until 6 months if you can, is so if your baby's always looking at you, and when they're sleeping, so say they're always looking to their right, you can kind of flip the bassinet, you can flip the crib and see if putting their head on the opposite end will get them to now look at you to the left. Sometimes it works. Sometimes babies will be looking at the window or the door.
The
Sometimes they're
light.
not looking towards you, but that's just like a quick thing you could try, snoo or not, and if it's in a crib or a bassinet, you just put the baby down like opposite, so their head
Right.
might be down at the feet end one night. And so that's just something I usually tell parents to just try. If you always notice your baby's looking to one way, don't try to set alarms and wake up and put the baby's head back to sleep, or when they're sleeping put their back to the middle or the other side, because most likely they're just going
They're
to go
just
back
gonna
that
move
way.
back.
And again, sleep is precious. So certainly like if your baby's sleeping, don't feel like you need to wake up to check on what side they're looking at. But that brings us to like, what can we do out of a snoo? What can we do out of a swaddle, out of the crib, and that is really where floor time comes in. Obviously, I talk a lot about tummy time. People call me the tummy time PT sometimes.
I love it.
And like, yeah, I have a tummy time guide. I talk a lot about tummy time, but it's really floor time, and that is unrestricted floor time. So giving your baby freedom to move and figure out their bodies, work through some of those primitive reflexes we talked about. Yes, tummy time is good, but also just placing your baby on their back on the floor is also good with
Right.
different toys positioned, not right where they can see, like a little bit, so they have to look to both ways and really go through their full range of motion of their necks. Especially if your baby is in a snoo, like also just giving them some floor time on their back is good too, because it's going to be very different. Their arms are going to be moving, which again is going to, how your arms move affects how your head moves. So
Right.
and then rolling them onto their stomach, trying tummy time. If you're having a hard time, I do have my tummy time guide that you can check out. And I'm
Yes,
sure,
I'll definitely link it below for you,
yeah,
everybody
and
as
then,
well.
lots of different options on your chest, on your lap, on a wedge, on, a boppy, pillow, things like that, on your couch if you're always supervised, but certainly rolling, kind of showing them. I often will tell parents, like, if you're going to do dummy time, don't just place baby right on their stomach. It's actually better to get them on their backs first and then slowly roll them onto their
Yeah.
sides. You can play there for a little bit and then get onto their belly. And just because a baby starts fussing doesn't mean you have to like pick them right up, because they're going to learn like, oh, tummy is bad. I don't
Yep.
like it. I get picked up. So, just trying to roll them back on their back and then like re-engaging them with whatever you're doing and seeing, hey, can I kind of bring them back and they can get regulated, and then we can try again going on to their belly. So I often tell parents, just floor time, get yourself like a good mat. And even like the big Love Every mat that's out there, right? There's actually no padding underneath it. It's an amazing play mat. I love it so much, but it's not padded. So you're still going to need like a little bit of a mat underneath. If you have like a thick rug or something, that's great. But I do recommend like getting a play mat for your baby for the floor. If you don't want to keep it out all the time, there's tons on Amazon and tons in the stores that you can fold up and just kind of keep off to the side.
Yeah.
But putting the mat down and like, if you can, get down on the ground with your baby. I just saw like a really, really cute sort of like mom and baby tummy time video this morning on Instagram. And, it's really about like that connection. Like they see you down there, you're down there with them, you're on the floor with them, and like, hey, you can get some stretches in,
Right.
obviously if you're having some difficulties postpartum or pain, maybe make sure somebody's there to help you kind of get off the floor, because that can be really hard at first. But it's exercise for you too. It's health for you too. And just even, you can maybe get some yoga in while your baby's doing their floor time, their tummy time. And
Absolutely.
I like to see babies playing by themselves on the floor, especially as they get older. Can they sort of regulate themselves? Can they, keep themselves entertained for a little bit? Because you don't want to have to just always be holding your baby, then how are you going to get anything done? Right. And if you do, then you know what? Try baby wearing, because if you have a baby that just doesn't want to be put down, baby wearing is great for like some of that vestibular input, being close to that connection. And then also like they're getting head control when they're, especially
Yes.
once baby is able to prop sit and you can face them out world facing in a carrier, like they're working a lot to like, control their head and, do a lot of things. So
Good core
um,
exercise.
absolutely. Absolutely. And there's so many wraps out there, carriers out there now that, they're all
Yes.
very different, but certainly you just find what works for you.
Absolutely. I think the big thing with what you said that I often take away and I tell clients a lot, especially when I was in the daycare. One of the daycares that I worked at, we had one baby bouncing seat and the baby was only allowed to be in it after they ate for 30 minutes. That was one of the rules of the center we had. Otherwise, they had to be on the floor on a play mat playing with something. And when I first went in after working, with families and babysitting and nanny, I was like, wow, that's crazy. Like, I always used to put baby in a place when I needed to wash dishes or go to the bathroom or whatever. But I guess I'm like, okay, well, in a daycare, you're not really going anywhere, so fair enough. Um, but I quickly saw and learned how much first few days babies are like, what the heck? And so quickly they're like, oh wow, okay, like I'm cool with this.
Mhm.
And especially seeing other babies doing that, right? But I think the big thing that you mentioned is like really just this floor time. It doesn't need to be specifically tummy time, which I think people think if my baby's on the floor, they should be doing tummy time, right? And I think, again, back to marketing and what people are saying and proud of and showing that they have and all this aesthetic is, oh my gosh, my baby has this really cool bouncer to sit in, or my baby has this great up seat or seat that they sit in, or positioner or swing or whatever it may be. Like, there are so many things on the market that are these like aesthetically pleasing, super expensive baby positioner or baby
Oh, yeah.
container, as we like to call them, right? And that's not needed. So
No,
especially if you are somebody who's using a snoo, try not to use many of those baby quote unquote containers, I would say, right? Just focusing more
absolutely.
on baby just being in the world.
Yeah. And I think too, like I'm all about being realistic.
Right.
Sometimes I'll walk into a house and I might see like four different of those like walkers that you sit in. I'm like, ooh, okay, all right. One is like, yeah, I'm a realist. Like, you need to get things done. You need to go to the
Yeah,
bathroom. So
literally.
it's all about really like if you've heard of them, just sort of yes spaces. And that is, with infants too, like having a safe spot for your baby that you can walk away from them for a second is crucial. And sometimes for parents, the only thing they can do is get one of those bouncer seats. Or,
Yep,
when I become a mom, like I'm definitely going to get a bouncer, but I'm not going to have my baby in it all the time. But,
absolutely.
I do love some of those upright. And like you said, it can be good for after feeding if you're not holding them or carrying them. Like I'll probably get a bouncer, but I'm not going to have my baby in it for 30, 40 minutes or an hour. And I'm definitely not going to let my baby sleep in it. I don't really love swings personally, but again, it's a safe space that you can like just put your baby in, sort of strap them in, and you can walk away for a second to go to the bathroom and they're going to be safe if you're using it
Right.
correctly. And so I think what's better than those things is like a bassinet, like a big bassinet or a pack and play
Back and play. I was gonna
or
say the
a
same thing.
gate. If you have a gate that you can just put the mat in and everything in that space, like is just for baby, then you're golden. You can walk away, you can get something in the kitchen, you can go to the
Yeah.
bathroom. Um,
Even if like I hear a lot of people like, oh, well, when I put them in that space, like my baby screams or my baby
yes.
cries. And I'm like, that's because you're not there. It's not because they're not safe. So remembering that, like you said earlier, it's good to teach them independent skills. And I sometimes urge my clients to be like, okay, well, let them be upset for a minute, go to the bathroom. And then like when you come out of the bathroom, just listen before you go see them. Just listen to if they've calmed down a little bit after a minute or two of you being gone because they're like, oh, wait, there's a toy here and they're distracted.
Mhm.
Or they were really just mad that you left for a second and they were like, okay, I know I'm safe. I'm okay. Right.
Yeah.
Because babies need to, and even if you don't have to go to the bathroom sometimes, just or like don't have to step away, like how we just keep using bathroom as our excuse here. But if you do or don't have to step away, sometimes even at a young age, just practicing like walking away for a minute or being out of sight where they can't see you, but you can still see them and seeing how they react to those different things and teaching them that it's okay to be alone. Because I think, like you said, with tummy time, when babies cry and you immediately pick them up and quote unquote rescue them, sometimes that can train their brains to think like, oh, okay, great. If I cry, I'm going to get picked up. Or if I cry and I'm picked up, that means that I wasn't safe.
Right.
And
Exactly.
by teaching them that it's okay to be upset sometimes and like it's okay to cry, that's how babies communicate. They may not be mad or truly sad every time. They're just like frustrated. And that's a totally valid feeling. And I think that that's something else to just totally think about when you're putting baby in a yes space like that I talk to my clients about all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's why like pack and plays can be so versatile.
Yeah,
They have the bassinet addition, they have the changing area, and then you can use it as like a safe play yard. I think that's really, really helpful. I do love sort of just like obviously if your baby's not rolling yet, just putting them on a mat should be safe. But if you have pets or older children that you're worried about, then getting one of those gates, even just like on Facebook Marketplace or something. And I think
yeah,
just starting that, like, they're safe, so they're okay, so that might bring down some of your anxiety or angst about just stepping away, and which will also
absolutely.
in tune, they'll pick up on that, right? So
Yes. Yes. I love that. I love that so much. Well, hopefully we did a little bit of myth busting here today and, helped those who don't have these snooze decide if that they really think that it's that important to them or if they can, navigate some other things. I think I always say if you are so nervous about sleep, it's so much more worth it to invest in chatting with somebody that can help with sleep. Or if you're really worried about tummy time, chatting with somebody who can help with that is so much more worth it, these services, than this stuff that is giving promises that may or may not work for your baby.
yeah, and I had a parent say yesterday to me, just on the silly little poll I put on Instagram, she said, I honestly think that you are either going to have a baby who sleeps or you're going to have a baby who doesn't sleep. And my children one of them hated the snoo and one of them loved it. So
Mm-hmm.
if I didn't have that second, it wouldn't have been worth it. Like it's $1,700, roughly around there for 6 months. You can rent them. So I think that can be a little bit more of a price point for people, but they're used. So, you have to take that in consideration if you're comfortable with that.
Right.
So there are other options than just having to buy it. There is talks and question about whether or not insurance will ever approve them. So that might change the game too with the
Yeah.
FDA approval if insurance is going to start, or you can use FSA or HSA, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are wondering if you absolutely need it, I just don't know if like the pros outweigh the cons. And again, your baby might hate it.
I know. And I
So then
typically say
what?
that with the person that said like your baby's either a good sleeper or not. I always tell my clients too, I'm like, don't buy all of these things, or even if you're on your registry, like wait, because after your baby comes home, we live in a day and age where you can click something and it's at your house within 48 hours. So like literally just wait. And especially, you can see, okay, my baby really likes movement or my baby just really wants to be on me. Like you'll quickly learn what they need and what they're looking for. And it may not be a snoo movement. And then if you've already purchased this item or rented this item, you've now wasted your money on that, right?
Mhm.
So I think that goes for anything, but especially for things like that where they are big ticket items and you don't know if your baby's going to like it or not. Wait it out, see what happens. Wait till they're earthside and see how everything goes with those first few weeks or week or two. But yes, I appreciate all of your knowledge and support with this topic because like I said at the beginning, I really do think it's probably one of the most controversial baby products. And to be able to have a PT's side of it and I think my sleep and experience side of it, we can collaboratively combat the topic with a lot of different perspectives, which I think can be really helpful to those listening. So I appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, and I'm going to be putting a blog out too with kind of a summary of a lot of this too. So once that gets out into the world, we can certainly
Yes.
link it to the podcast too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Check out the show notes below to get more information on Karen's tummy time book, the podcast episode, the blog post, and lots of more information. I'll definitely link everything below. But yes, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.